Okay, so I think we'll get going. So again, welcome to EcoAct's Roundtable, where we'll be covering transition planning and transformation. This is actually going to be a series of webinars, which I'll kind of give you some highlights on what the subjects that are upcoming, because as you'll see in this webinar, it's just the beginning of transition planning and transformation, and we really wanted to kind of like open the door to see what the drivers are, how to start moving on your transition planning and transformation. Um, but this is going to be a series of webinars, so we'll hopefully get the momentum going for new webinars that are going to be launched in the coming months. So quickly going to the next slide. Just want to introduce everybody who is going to be speaking on this webinar. So we have a great roundtable with experts from our global offices. So I'll kickstart. My name is William Theisen. I'm the CEO of EcoAct North America, so overseeing our team in Canada and in the US. I've been with the company since for in over 8 years now, since 2015. Next on the list is Frankie Bright, who is a managing consultant in our from our EcoAct Northern Europe team. She's based in the UK. She's also been here for coincidentally over 8 years over this journey where we've seen a lot of transition and transformation in our own service offering. And lastly, we have Géraldine Dujardin, who is a manager in our luxury fashion and retail sector. She's joining from our Southern Europe office, so in France. She's been with the company over 3 years and is definitely excited to be kind of showing and demonstrating what the drivers are that are coming from Europe within a transition and transformation. So just quickly, just so kind of get this out of the way, the EcoAct introduction, just to give you a flavor of who we are. EcoAct, I'll just cover this quite quickly, was actually founded in 2005. So we've actually been around for 18 years. And we have really our ethos is to lead the way to developing sustainable business solutions that deliver true value for both climate and our clients. We think they don't need to be mutually exclusive. We do this with our sustainability advisory business, our nature and tech-based solutions business, so offsets, really the combination. So we have a kind of one-stop shop in terms of our service offering when it comes to climate and making sure that our clients are well on the way to achieve net zero. We have experts all across Europe, so in France, the UK, Spain, as well as North America and Canada and in the US, as well also in Europe with Germany and Italy. We also have presence in Africa with our team in Kenya. So we've been doing this for quite a while, and our position has changed quite aggressively as the sustainability issues progress and mature to make sure that we're always on the cutting edge and supporting our clients to achieve their net zero targets. Moving to the next slide. So what is the impetus of this? So we actually just recently launched our white paper on laying the foundations for transformation. So how to build a resilient and competitive business within planetary boundaries. If you have not downloaded it yet, you can download it. We have the QR code on your bottom right that you can download it. Really the focus of this white paper was to demonstrate the imperative to transform if we are to stay on track globally with 1.5 degrees and respect planetary boundaries. So also the need to move beyond carbon and consider the interdependent nature of planetary boundaries and the broader sustainability agenda, such as the protection of biodiversity and nature, water, and land use. So all of these are interconnected, but really broadening the focus from carbon to other areas. And how effective transition planning can enable transformation. And lastly, to understand how EcoAct's approach can support organizations in building resilient, competitive, and sustainable business models, which is really the imperative that we need now to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Moving on to the next slide. So on the agenda today, we'll again, this will be a series of webinars that we'll be hosting. But today we're really going to be focusing on what is driving transformation across the globe. So having the representatives from our various geographies and seeing what's really pushing transformation forward, as opposed to just declaring ambition. How can transition planning enable the transformation towards resilient, competitive, and sustainable businesses? And what defines a credible climate transition plan and key activities for starting your transformation today? And we do want to hold a bit of time at the end to have a live Q&A because we want your questions. We're here for you. And if we don't get to them, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to respond. So moving along, let's get this roundtable started. So we're not going to have slides on this roundtable. So we're really just going to dive into the questions. So first on the list is going to be looking at Géraldine. So being in France, being in Europe, what is driving transformation within French companies? And what's really kind of moving from just declaring ambition to actually transforming their business models?
Yes, hello everybody. Hi, yes, so well, on the French market, I would say there is three main drivers. First one being really the absolute need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Second being to ensure the resiliency of the company activities. And the third one is really linked to improving the extra financial reporting to demonstrate really the robustness of the activity to investors. So coming back to the first driver, we really believe that the first driver is the absolute need for companies to reduce their impact. Actually, companies really realize now that reducing emission in the magnitude required by the Paris Agreement or by the science-based target commitment will not be achievable through a simple and easy reduction plan. It's going to take more effort. And so they really need to transform themselves in depth. To share with you some data, the GHG reduction achievable with a simple reduction plan could be around 30%, but the reduction target for SBT net zero is 90% reduction. So the question is really, how do you go and reach those 60 additional points? And we do believe that it requires a business model transformation. So that would be the first and first driver. Second driver for us is really to improve the resiliency of the activity. The idea is really to evaluate the climate risk on the value chain and in order to adapt and enhance the resiliency of the company. In the future, we know that the climate crisis will impact the whole value chain. And the most critical part might be the access to the raw materials. For instance, for a fashion company, the access to cotton, to wool will be more difficult and also more expensive. So a good way to improve resiliency is to calculate this financial impact and also to adapt maybe the sourcing, reduce its dependency on virgin raw materials through a shift toward maybe recycled material or circular economy. And we do believe that this climate risk topic is really interesting because it shows that sustainability is no longer an issue just for the sustainability team, but it really is something that's gonna have some interest for the whole team and especially the financial team as well. Because the related questions are, what is the cost of my actions? What is the cost for my inaction? What is the cost of my lack of competitiveness on those topics? And finally, the last driver is the extra financial reporting. The idea here is really to go beyond the simple compliance and to be able to demonstrate the robustness of the carbon performance to the investors by improving those extra financial reporting. So it might be CDP, CSRD, etc. So reporting is really a good guidance on what a company should do. For instance, taking the example of the CSRD, it incorporates the concept of double materiality. It means that companies have to report not only on the company's own impact on the environment, but also on how sustainability issue might create financial risk for the company. And this is exactly what we do for our clients at EcoAct.
So it sounds like there's like an operational imperative to just keep competitive, to keep resilient, all right? Like, but there's also pressure coming from investors. There's also pressure coming from regulation happening in Europe. This seems to be really kind of pushing the transformation agenda among many companies, and we're seeing that also in North America. But to kind of move over to the UK, what are you seeing, Frankie, in the UK? How is transformation being driven in the UK?
I mean, to be honest, the leaders and the people that are already thinking about this, it's the same drivers as Géraldine has kind of covered. But I think really the uptick and interest that's kind of building is driven by kind of reporting requirements that are going to be coming in over here. So despite the recent backtracks that there might have been, the UK does still have a net zero by 2050 target, and there's a 68% reduction by 2030 that's wanted. So realistically, 2030 used to feel quite far in the distance. Now, you know, it's just around the corner. So attention from both the kind of government and investors is shifting from kind of, you know, what are you doing and what are the commitments to actually how are you going to achieve that and be viable to operate in the low carbon world that we need. So investors are saying targets are not enough. What are the actions? How much is it going to cost? And how is that going to kind of impact your strategy? So there's been some kind of rollout of legislation requirements. TCFD has been mandatory in the UK across different parts of the economy since 2021. And the feedback from that has basically been that the strategy side of it is not good enough. The information is not granular enough for investors to make investment decisions, and it's not necessarily even the information that they want to see. This is also reflected kind of globally, just to touch on that CDP did a review of the responses last year, and actually it was only less than 1% of companies that have got what they would consider a credible transition plan. So out of the 18,500, you know, large companies that respond, that's less than 200 that, you know, have a plan in place. As well as this, we've got some new regulation that's potentially on the horizon with the UK CSRD and the ISSB, IFRS regulations coming in. So in order to kind of address this quality gap, the HM Treasury set up a task force called the Transition Plan Task Force. Kind of does what the name says on the tin. I will just refer to it as the TPT from now on to save myself some time. But the idea of that is it is a kind of gold standard framework for transition plan disclosure. So that is kind of what, you know, the information that needs to be out there, but they've also provided some guidance around kind of how you start to build a transition plan and how you would go about kind of implementing this. So this was established in, I think it was early 2022, but the final framework was released last week, and there's kind of the official launch next week that's taking place. And it's designed to be complementative to TCFD and the ISSB regs that are coming. And as I said, to kind of build on the information that's being disclosed around the strategy side of things. I think something that's important to point out of this is that the FCA have been heavily involved with the TPT throughout the entire process. And it has already said that it will be planning to strengthen its own requirements for reporting. So I think, you know, due to their active involvement with this, it's likely that that is going to happen relatively quickly. So people, you know, need to start thinking about this now and get prepared, really. And I think something else that kind of just shows how transformative and how disruptive some of these kind of changes may be for businesses is that there is a requirement from the TPT to have a change management plan associated with anything that's being published. So, you know, that's looking at how ready your business is for change, but realistically, there's going to be some really key stakeholders that maybe are not at that leadership level that are brought in, maybe more operational day to day, that are, you know, potentially could have some real impacts on their roles. So are they being brought along? Are they being upskilled? Are they on board with the decision? So companies really do need to make sure you're kind of thinking about what change needs to happen, but how you're going to enact and implement that change as well.
Makes a lot of sense. So it really just it seems like the time is now really to start thinking about transformation, just to kind of reap the benefits, and also just comply with investor requirements. This is quite similar to what we're seeing in North America. In North America, there's less regulation, but it has been similarly investor driven, right? Like we've seen investors kind of push companies to do more, to set science-based targets. And now that we're seeing more kind of events happen all over North America, whether it's fires or flooding, like similar to what we had in New York City on Friday. Investors just really want to understand that their investments are going to be resilient going forward. That said, I mean, what Géraldine and Frankie, you've spoken about, we're starting to see also in the United States. We're seeing more regulation come out. You know, everybody's waiting on pins and needles for the SEC guidance to come out, which will, you know, which is expected to require publicly traded companies to disclose their carbon emissions, scope 1, 2, and potentially material of scopes in scope 3, in addition to you know, the California regulation that is just about to be signed by Gavin Newsom. By mid-month, he has to make a decision. So the first bill with SB 253, the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, which will require companies in California, both private and public, to start disclosing on scopes 1, 2, and 3 if they have operations or investments in California, but also looking at climate risk. What you know, both of you have spoken about, kind of like starting to disclose those. And that's in a separate bill that's going to be considered in California, SB 261. And I mean, additionally, Géraldine, you mentioned CSRD, right? Like the CSRD is going to touch North America, right? Like if you do have investments or employees, a certain threshold of employees within Europe, it kind of doesn't matter whether SEC comes in or not. The CSRD is going to really amplify the need for disclosure transition plans by companies that do, and many of our clients that do have operations in Europe. And so that just means more disclosure. And then if there is more disclosure from California through CSRD and potentially through the SEC guidance that's supposed to come out, that means more investor questions, right? Like really kind of upping the ante on how companies are actually going to not only reduce but transform their business. That's going to be a natural progression of the discussion and the questions that a lot of our companies are already getting. Before in North America, this has been going, you know, evolving quite quickly from just us supplying, you know, carbon footprints, and now companies really want to go into detail and see where the hotspots are, see reduction actions, but also see where they can start thinking about more longer term initiatives of transforming their business to achieve net zero emissions or reducing up to 90% of their emissions. The other thing that's happening is to take advantage of incentives. So we're seeing the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, be put in place. It's, you know, in the US, where it's aligned with the Paris Agreement objectives, it puts us on track for 40% of emissions by 2030. But it also prioritizes, you know, investments in renewable energy and EVs and biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel. So it's also creating the context and the incentives to transform your company in the US, because to be competitive, you're going to want to take advantage of a lot of these incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act. And investors are going to be expecting that companies are going to transform and be aligned with where the US is going and becoming net zero by 2050. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of drivers. Everybody's kind of moving in this direction. Everybody really wants to transform their business. But how do we get started, right? Like this is still early and we don't have all the answers. Like, and sustainability is moving forward at lightning speed due to the imperative. So kind of moving back to Frankie, what does a climate transition plan look like? How do we even start thinking about getting started?
So there's a few elements. I suppose the key top line summary is it needs to be driven by science. It needs to be publicly disclosed, and at a high level, it needs to kind of outline what you're going to do as a business to make sure your model aligns to the low carbon 1.5 degree world. It needs to show that you've considered biodiversity and nature, not only considered it, but also actually kind of contributing to the restoration of that. and also kind of looking at the wider kind of people and planet in the long term and making sure that the economy works as a whole for all of that. So it's something that you kind of later hear something is referred to as just transitioning. So like on the whole, it's basically saying it's not just emissions that we need to be thinking about anymore. It's the wider concept. We need to be bringing in biodiversity, you know, water usage, land use change, as you mentioned, as well as that just transitioning. So like a just transition is effectively bringing, I think, the S from the ESG, so the social side of things, kind of slightly more into the spotlight. So what it means is, you know, when you're making decisions around adaptation or kind of reduction initiatives, you also need to be thinking about the interdependencies with kind of the wider world, really. So that could be kind of local communities where you're sourcing products from, but more tangibly, potentially kind of your workforce. So an example of that would be if you are, you know, a secondhand car reseller that's working with kind of traditional combustion engines and you're starting to transition to the EV market, are you doing something to bring your workforce along with you? Are you skilling and retraining them to be able to be on that transition with you? Or are you just kind of casting them out in the cold and not thinking about them? So we do really need to start bringing kind of that wider kind of interdependency consideration into it. So I think in terms of the plan itself, it's really fundamental that it's a time-bound action plan. You know, I mentioned it in the previous question, but we need to outline what your ambition is. You need to really understand what you're going to do to achieve that. And when I say that, it's not just, hey, we're going to install some solar panels. It's, we're going to install solar panels. We're going to do it in this year. This is how much it's going to cost me. And this is what that will mean for how we might need to change our current financial planning or kind of strategy. So in my eyes, I feel like the kind of transition plan and the framework and the way that it's being approached is almost a kind of turning the way that most people I engage with the sustainability budgeting do it traditionally. I think previously it's always been a case of what can feasibly be allocated to these activities and kind of prioritizing things. I think it just kind of shines a different lens on it to say, okay, look, we know we're going to be operating in a different world, whether that be kind of physical or low carbon. And actually, we need to make sure our business is still viable in that. So it's not a case of what can we afford to spend, it's what do we need to change, how much is it going to cost us, and how do we ensure that we've raised the capital to be able to action those plans, basically. So as well as that, it needs to be complete. We are talking about not just yourself, we're talking about your full value chain. So you can't be excluding any material areas. But one thing I would caveat, because I feel like a lot of people may have had a heart attack on this call, it's designed to be an iterative process. We very much it's unfeasible for people to have a fully fleshed out transition plan, the first time that you're thinking about it. The idea is that you need to kind of build on it and you need kind of solid foundations. You need proper data and proper information to be making these decisions, which might take a bit of time to kind of come across. So long as the direction and travel is there, that's enough to start with. And I think another key part of it is like the accountability. So we've seen it within kind of TCFD and climate risk reporting specifically, but really understanding who owns and who is managing climate within the business, because that then feeds into how is it internally coherent. So what we mean by that is how are you embedding it within your business as usual strategy decisions, your financial planning, and kind of everyday business decisions. And then I think the most important element is about it being flexible and responsive. So I think one of the things is, it's all very well sitting down, planning what might happen in the future, but we all know things change. We're not crystal ball keepers. So I think the key thing is understanding what influences that plan, what are the parameters, what are the variables that might change when you want to deploy capital, when you might want to kind of hold back on certain things. So I think it's one of the things that, realistically talking to clients more and more, it's the part that they're most concerned about. It's all well and good kind of getting a grip on this, but how do we really truly embed this into our business and kind of empower our employees to be making these decisions in their day-to-day roles? So it's one of the things that we've actually been kind of working on. We've been developing a tool that's a kind of feasibility and scenario modeling tool, which will allow businesses to kind of input all of their emissions reductions, the costs associated, but also be able to kind of model wider market impacts. So things like how will grid greening across different locations also kind of contribute to your emissions reductions. But I think that, that's almost a kind of calculator. But I think the key thing about that is it does allow that scenario planning. So what you're able to do is really kind of use that to understand, okay, if we're to deploy more capex at the start versus later, what does that mean for the kind of emissions reduction trajectory? What does that mean for our capital cost paybacks, etc.? So one of the nice things that we've been building is that, this is one of the biggest concerns for our clients. So as we take them through this journey, the idea is that we have this tool. We use this as part of our own assessment as well internally, but at the end of it, we are able to transfer that tool into the business. The users of that tool will have been kind of building it with us. They understand the parameters and the variables and how they change that tool if things are to change in their strategy. So, if something was to go catastrophically wrong and there was a freezing spend for like a year, what does that mean? How could they then re-strategize to make sure that they're still on the right emissions reduction trajectory? So I think, the key part for us is we can help you with all of this, but we know that this needs to be kind of embedded and you need to take ownership of that. So I think, having that tool to kind of help clients and not just leave them at the end and say, hey, there's your strategy, I hope nothing goes wrong, is going to be quite valuable.
Yeah, no, and I see the infinity sign behind us all, right? Like this is I mean, you kind of highlight that it's an iterative process over and over again, right? Like you can set your goals, you see where you need to prioritize, but regulation's going to change, government regulations are going to change. There's going to be new disclosures, there's going to be new events that are happening as the climate changes, and there's also going to be internal business changes. So it just has to be, you have to set goals, but also allow yourself the flexibility. It sounds to make informed decisions also in the short term to kind of make sure that you're keep on the right track, and that you're taking the most out of the overall context. And there's a lot in there, right? Like there's we're moving quickly, but what else? Géraldine, I'll kind of look to you. Do you want to complement anything? Like, what else do you see that transition plans need to consider when kind of embarking on the journey of like basically transforming your entire business so you're resilient?
Yeah, well, maybe I can take an example of a fashion company. Yeah, well, when you start to think of the transformation process, I would think that the first step would be to really have like a very deep understanding of your value chain, and this is really important. So you have to understand what is your value chain, what are your suppliers, what your value chain does have as an impact, what are the risks. Well, the target would be to know your suppliers from tier 1 to the last tier, and also to be able to collect the data from all the suppliers. For instance, for a fashion company, it means to improve your raw material traceability. Where does my cotton come from? What parcel? What agricultural practice on this parcel? Etc., etc. Finally, well, the sustainable issue is very much linked to your capacity to collect and treat the data. So we do believe that you need to be supported very much by the information system and some digital tools as well, because those sustainable and information systems teams, we do think they really need to work together on those topics. Yeah, and maybe the second step, once you've done that and you have a clear idea of what is your value chain, what is its impact, what are the risks, then you move on to a second step, which is much more, I would say, creative. The idea here is really to imagine an improved way of doing business, a different way of doing business through, we do believe, a collective work and a lot of creativity. And it's the idea of to think out of the box and find new ways of doing business, not just as we used to do, focuses on growth, but also finding other way of doing business. And the third step we do think is to implement, well, your transformation plan. And we do believe that at EcoAct that this new way of doing business will be very demanding for everyone. And we need also to address some maybe cultural issue and governance issues. So we really need to also work on this. What are the breaks? What are maybe the people we can rely on to make this transformation happen? And so that's really touching some very delicate things, which are cultural at the ADN of the company and cultural and governance issues. So, well, yeah. So finally, transforming an organization is, as you said, William, an ongoing improvement process, and also a process finally that, well, needs to mobilize the whole organization, not only the sustainable team, but as we saw before, finance team, information system, well, the whole suppliers, everybody. So, and also a lot of very different skills.
Yeah, and the fashion industry is a complicated one with very extensive, lots of tiers in their supply chain. So definitely data, but what I'm really hearing is a lot of data, right? Like, and that's what we have been focusing on for years, and just looking at scope 3, trying to even get a good handle on data as the emission factors progress, as we get more primary data, as we get more suppliers on board, but it all becomes a puzzle piece, right? Like, so, you know, including that scope 3 in report in disclosures, right? Like, will kind of move that data forward. And so then going back to that iterative process, right? Like, you'll have more data to make better decisions within your supply chain as there's more disclosure. So it's kind of, it all fits together. I'm looking at, you know, some of the questions that are coming in, and you guys have really done a great job of like kind of laying the land and how to kind of like move forward. But there are some questions coming in about biodiversity and nature, right? Like, which is very much linked to the UN Biodiversity Conference. We kind of talked about going outside of carbon and looking at other areas such as biodiversity. You know, how do we get started in there? What are some secure actions that we can take in terms of incorporating nature-based solutions into their transition plans? Maybe I'll look to Frankie, Géraldine, but I mean, Frankie, if you want to take this, I'm happy for you to take this.
Yes, I will just caveat, I'll touch on what Géraldine finished her last point on with lots of skills. It takes lots of different skill sets. So this is certainly something that sits within a very technical team within the business, but I'll give it a go. High level, but if you need a bit more detail, we mentioned it being a webinar series, so there'll actually be a specific biodiversity one to dive into for a bit more meat. But I think realistically, biodiversity for a lot of companies, I think, feels like climate was maybe 8 years ago when we first joined EcoAct. There's a bit of an understanding about what it is and some understanding of the importance, but not really enough of an understanding. So I think really the first step is just setting that real kind of foundation, making sure that leadership and operational roles are aware of what biodiversity is and how it can impact them. And then they'll be, to allow them to feel empowered to start making decisions or maybe challenging or, independently thinking about this. So they're kind of setting the foundation of the knowledge, but also setting the foundation of where you are. So as with scope 3, as with climate risk, we can't start to implement or influence things unless we understand where we are. So you really need to kind of understand within both your direct operations, but probably most importantly, your value chain, where those biodiversity hotspots might sit, kind of where they're arising and what they're arising from. Once you've been able to do that, I think you'll be able to kind of prioritize areas of focus and start to quantify some of those impacts. So again, one of the things, we love data. One of the things that we've been doing is creating a biodiversity calculator that clients can use to start to understand and quantify those items a bit more easily. And then, as with anything, if you want to see change, we need to set some targets. What do we want that change to be, and define the KPIs and monitoring processes around that effectively. So those are kind of they are very basic steps, but high level, it's what needs to be done. But I think realistically, the key thing to talk about is the mobilization of climate finance into nature-based solutions. Progress with climate has, I felt, been very slow. We have seen, and we're all talking about how the speed of momentum change, but we really do need to harness that and kind of make sure that everything is moving relatively quickly. So, nature-based solutions need to really carry equal weight to decarbonisation activities within the transition plan. Make sure that like all of the tools that are out there are used. I'm not going to list them because I'll probably get the acronyms wrong, but there are a huge amount of tools that have come online to kind of inform and help build a picture of this. And I think the other thing, maybe just to kind of mention, is that it's not just the kind of climate side. We're talking about just transition, but realistically, nature-based solutions offer kind of benefits that are beyond carbon. It's helping create jobs in communities. It's like kind of skill development and upskilling in different areas. So, those of us that have got sustainable development goals that we're aligned to, it can kind of feed into those. I think most excitingly from my perspective, because I come from a kind of CSA background, the kind of double effect that some of these nature-based solutions can have. So yes, they're reducing climate and reducing emissions, but actually mangroves, for example, they can act as a barrier in kind of coastal erosion. So actually contributing again to the just transition of protecting kind of local communities. But yeah, just interesting. We talk about double materiality, and the bad side of that, actually, it's maybe a more positive side of the double impacts of some of those solutions. So hopefully that answered some questions. The webinar will give you a bit more detail.
Amazing. No, I mean, yeah, the door is open on biodiversity. We're going in, we're getting KPIs, we're setting targets, we're looking at the value chain, but we're also looking outside the value chain, right? Like seeing how we can support, initiatives like mangroves rehabilitation, just because that makes business more resilient and our planet more resilient. We can't just look within, we have to look without. But definitely a lot of new doors are going to be open and new data being collected, which will also inform the transformation strategy on a whole. I am seeing one other question that maybe and the questions are coming in, so please keep on sending them in. These are really great. We want to make sure that we're answering your questions, so please feel free to keep on entering them into the Q&A. It's just I see a question actually about like us. So EcoAct, we've been kind of known as doing A to zero, right? Like looking at reductions, or, science-based targets, reporting, nature and tech-based solutions, but we're kind of evolving, right? Like into a new model or approach, as we like to call it. So the actor approach that we're kind of launching, thanks to all the research that was done from this white paper, is that we need to move and expand, but also just as a organic transition into what we need to do in order to support our clients. So this really is the actor model. If there's a question on it, it's with the question I received on it, it's just in a nutshell, it's really our iterative process from over 18 years of experience working with, companies globally across sectors. It just represents where we see clients needing to go and organizations needing to take a radical transformation and build business models that are not just resilient to the growing climate risk, but economically viable and equitable, right? Like, so we're looking outside the carbon box. We're looking at biodiversity, we're looking at water, we're looking at all these different areas because it can't just be a carbon discussion anymore. We really need to look out and see how we're supporting regenerating ecosystems and building natural capital. So our transformation actor approach is intended really to be used as a lens to examine what needs to be done in a continual cycle of improvement with the great infinity signs that we see behind us, because it will just keep going back and forth to keep on working and pushing the agenda forward. And most of the clients we collaborate with often go through multiple phases of change and transformation. So they really do recognize that net zero is not just an end goal, but it's an ongoing process, really integrated throughout the whole company. The exercise needs to be facilitated by internal stakeholders, but it needs to be embraced by the company as a whole with their and to unlock their transformation potential and really enable to proactively adapt and seize the opportunities, but also mitigate the risk. But there are going to be a lot of opportunities in being more competitive, and really rising to the above the fray in their kind of within their own sectors, and really continue to be competitive in a changing environment. So that is a little bit on our actor model, but going on to additional questions that I'm seeing through, I'm just kind of looking through the chat. I have a question that may be more suitable for Géraldine, but Frankie, feel free to chime in. So we have like a question about working in a fashion and luxury sector, right? Like there are kind of companies online that really want to look at climate transition plans because it entails multiple dimensions and considerations. What are like the initial first steps to take, right? Like what should they look at immediately?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, the first thing to do is really to do the assessment. So where do you stand? Know your value chain. Do your maybe, work on your carbon footprint and your risk analysis on your value chain. So I would say that this is the first part to be done. So you're gonna spend some time and collect quite a lot of data for that part. But that's really the basis. And at EcoAct, I think we do work a lot with data because we want really to have like robust analysis to work on. So that's really the basis. And of course, as you said, it's improvement process. So the first year, you're going to be able to grab some data and not all of them, but that's okay. It's the way it works. And maybe year two, you'll be able to go a step further and grab some more data and maybe go much into in much detail. But it's really something. The basis is the data and understand your business and value chain and what its impact is and what are the risks of your company in the future.
Risk are huge. I mean, just even on the raw materials, right? Like looking at really identifying which ones are the most material risks, whether they be physical risks or transition risks, right? Like, I mean, it can be where are you going to source your cotton as if there's going to be a heat wave, right? Like, how are you going to transition your supply chain, right? Like, those are business imperatives that they could be opportunities to be not just make a quick fix, but transform your company into being more resilient for the longer term.
That's right. Actually, the difficulty is that we do not know what the future will be in terms of climate. I mean, we don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what it would look like. But what we do know is that we do work a lot with the IPCC scenarios, and so the scientific here really help us in building some scenarios. So we don't know what's going to be the temperature in 2050 or maybe further than that. But what we do know is that maybe the maximum is going to be maybe +4 degrees, and maybe the most optimistic would be a temperature that would be under 1.5 degree increase. So what we're going to do at EcoAct is we're going to see what will happen for your company and for your whole value chain under a 4 degree scenario and under a 1.5 scenario, and see what happens in those two cases. So maybe in the 4 degree scenario, you'll have a lot of physical risk on your value chain. So for a fashion company, it's going to be how my cotton is going to be affected, how maybe the heat waves are going to impact my cotton, how the water stress is going to impact my cotton, maybe my wool through the animals, etc., etc. And so we're gonna look at that. So what's going to happen in a world of 4 degree, and maybe what's going to happen on the contrary on an optimistic world of 1.5 degree. But in this scenario, you would have much more taxes and regulations. So it means also that maybe the cost of raw material or energy is going to rise. So we would also modelize all of this to help the company understand in what kind of future it will have to evolve. So we don't know either one's going to happen, but what we know is going to be something in between those two scenario that we're building. So it really helps the company to understand what kind of risk it might go under in the future.
Yeah, so it sounds like getting ready now to make decisions later quickly is going to be important, like identifying those physical and transition risks, right? Like, because things are going to change, incentives are going to change. We're going back to that, like government, like, but you want to be prepared to react quickly once the changes happen, right? Like, and really take advantage as much as possible.
Absolutely, and also what is also what we found out that is if the resources and if for instance the raw materials will be reduced in the future because of the climate environment. Of course, companies there will be a battle over the resources also, and prices are going to go up. So really, companies are starting now to really work on their sourcing strategy and also working on their financial business model to be able to improve their resiliency. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the front runners now really could reap the benefits later. I just see one question, a really good practical question. So maybe I'll shoot this over to you, Frankie. So transition plans, are they vetted? Is someone going to get, people are going to get off this call, get busy writing their transition plans, right? Like who's evaluating this? What body should they be submitted to, at least in the UK, right? Like, someone going to get an A grade on their transition plan? Like, what happens?
So I suppose it's a little bit unclear at the moment because we're kind of waiting for that to be decided. But effectively, it's going to follow the same pattern as the TCFD. Kind of, it will be regulated by the FCA and kind of managed by the FCA. And the expectation is that it's not like CDP where you need to fill out a certain document. Nobody, as you say, is going to be kind of giving you any feedback on this directly, investors maybe, because it might be, you might not be where they're expecting you to be, but it's a disclosure mechanism rather than an indices. And I think the key thing is that the TPT have actually said, and I was quite surprised by this, that these transition plans should be a standalone document. So when we started, when TCFD has been introduced, the whole point of that is integrated reporting and making sure it's alongside, the financial disclosures. Whereas this, I suppose, is, larger than just the finances. It's transforming the whole business. So that standalone document, now I'm saying it out loud, actually makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how long those and the development of those transition plans over time. And I think just while we're on the practical side of reporting, one of the requirements is that you need to make sure you're publishing an updated version of that as a minimum every 3 years. However, if there is something material, that you've rebaselined, there's been some acquisitions or divestments or, strategic changes that are material, then you will need to kind of update that document prior to that as well.
Wow. Yeah, no, and that's good to really kind of inspire other regulations going forward. I imagine. So very exciting times. So just going on to another question that I'm seeing. So, and feel free, either one of you can jump in. But are there any other scientific-based things which are similar to science-based targets for climate change for other impact assessment dimensions, right? Like, so there seems to be a commonality that everybody's kind of on board with science-based targets, the validation process, at least, there's a good cohort of companies that are already on the journey for net zero targets as well. But what about other impact assessment dimensions? Like, is there any kind of voluntary or areas where the people can look at it for guidance on how to, set those targets?
Yeah, well, of course, there's the science-based target on climate, and you have also the science-based target for nature, which are on the the other aspects of the environment. So, yes, this is really something that's getting bigger and bigger, even though it's still not as mature as the analysis on climate. I would think that, yeah, climate now we have a lot of experience. So carbon footprint is something that really we start really to have like some robust analysis for this. Biodiversity, science-based target for nature is still like really in a process of being built, and the guidance are still in the process of being edited and published. So is it the right time now to start like doing the biodiversity, maybe a screening, and start really learning about the impact of the company? But it's going to be really something that we do believe it's going to build up from now on more and more. But yeah, science-based target for nature is a really good way of having the well, a good way to address the other part other than climate. Absolutely.
No, that's so great. And this has
Frankie,
moved
you want to add
quickly.
something?
Yeah. Frankie, do you have anything to add or any other things that you're seeing?
No, I was going to kind of highlight that, and the SBTI, I think the uptake, we were slowly watching the uptake graph on the website over years and years, and then it's accelerated. So it's good to see that the movement is, they've got this out there. All I was going to add was just the kind of elements that sit within that. So I think it covers freshwater, land, biodiversity, and oceans. So a good number of kind of things for people to get started on there.
Kind of building off that, so Frankie, I'm going to look at you again. But so how soon? This is another question that has come up. Is how soon can we expect a reporting regime that will encompass all elements of TCFD, TNFD, TPT, all the alphabet soup that we can get in there in that question, right? Like, yeah, what's on the horizon?
I mean, I can speak from kind of the UK, I suppose, but realistically, if I can take transition planning out of that, all of the other acronyms that you throw at me are kind of encompassed within the ISSB, IFRS standards that are coming out. So basically what has happened is kind of TCFD, I always get these acronyms wrong, but SASB and CSDR, I think it is, that have all kind of had different areas. TCFD was on climate risk. The others are on kind of climate as well, that have a more social side. Everybody has, panicked and gone, there's too many things in the market at the moment. It's massive burden. So there's been a lot of work that's happened over the last few years to kind of consolidate that. And now the IFRS, so the IFSB was formed by the IFRS to kind of focus on sustainability, and they have released, or they've just released the finalized, I think, IFRS S1, which is sustainability as a whole. So that's encompassing your nature, your water, all of that. And then IFRS S2, which is specifically on climate risk. So here in the UK, it's been said that, that's now finalized, it's under review, and it's likely that the endorsement of that is going to come in summertime. I think they said June 2024. So it could be that ISSB, IFRS reporting comes in, and by the financial year 2025, you could be having to disclose a report. I think the thing to add on to that is the TPT has been designed to sit over the top of it. So I don't see that kind of being sucked in the near future. So it's likely to be that it's ISSB and the TPT kind of guidance, but that's what's on the horizon for the UK at least.
I'm just looking forward to integration just to go have less acronyms.
I know, it's a minefield.
I mean, I think that unfortunately we're running out of time. Hopefully this is the insight that Frankie, Géraldine have provided, have at least gotten you on board with the drivers, really what's pushing the agenda in terms of transformation and transition planning, but also kind of the first steps to get started. This is going to be, again, a series of we don't have all the answers now, and but the conversation is moving quite quickly, and we are moving quickly with it. So we're going to have additional webinars that are going to come out in November and January of 2024, November 2023. So the first one is looking at setting the direction for your transformation, laying the foundations for your climate and nature strategy. And then the one in January 2024, harnessing the power of nature-based solutions in your transformation journey. So, and there's going to be more coming, right? Like we understand our, our clients and the wider audience is looking for answers quite quickly, but this is all still quite new. So we're just going to be, making sure we're up to date with the latest developments and how we're supporting our clients on their transformation, how they're looking to achieve net zero, and how they're pushing, going from just ambition to really making transformative change. And I know that there were additional questions. We'll try to get back to the people who submitted all the questions. And thank you so much for submitting all of those. That have been really helpful to kind of push the discussion forward to make sure that we're answering your questions on transformation and how it's evolving. Again, I just wanted to highlight the white paper, laying the foundations for transformation, that was released. There's a lot of information, data that you can use to get further buy-in in your companies. We really hope that you can kind of leverage this to, pave the way for your own transformation within your own context. So the QR code is here, and feel free to use your camera to download it. And hopefully this will kind of pave the way for your own journey. But with that said, I think we are just about to close the webinar. So I really want to thank Frankie, Géraldine for their insights from the various geographies, right? Like we're all intertwined. What happens in Europe is definitely going to affect North America. We have our own things going on, own regulation, but when it comes to scope 3 and competitiveness, everybody's going to kind of be moving the quickest possible on the transformation journey. So I really want to thank you for your insights. I want to thank all the participants who submitted questions and the wider audience for joining. Please stay tuned for upcoming webinars. We'll be definitely diving down this transformation journey further. So with that, we will close the webinar, and I wish everybody a good afternoon, a good rest of your morning, and a good rest of your day.
Thank you, William.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.